Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Advanced OSHA Record Keeping, Avoiding Costly Mistakes in 2025. My name is Holly Foxworth. I'm one of the registered nurses here at Axiom. I'm also the Director of Marketing Communications, and I'm thrilled to death that you guys are all joining us here today. We want to make for sure that the session is not just an essential part of your day as you're getting closer to that March 2nd deadline, but also that it's really insightful for you. So we want to make sure that we're clearing up any confusion that you have, any questions that you have, walk you through some real world scenarios, and really make for sure that you're on the right track so you can avoid some of those mistakes. We have a fantastic panel that's joining us today. We have Dr. Scott Sherry, and he's going to walk us through the corporate reporting principles and some of the best practices. We have Matt Bearden, who is the Regional Safety Manager with Sun State Equipment Rental. He is going to talk to us about the latest updates, some of the requirements as you think about your strategy. He'll also talk to you about some of the top 10 mistakes that people normally make. In addition to that, we have Dara Wheeler, who is our Chief Marketing Officer, and she is going to put you guys on the hot seat today. She has the real life OSHA scenarios, and so anyway, she's going to give you those questions, and that'll be the really exciting part of the webinar here today. A lot of these questions you guys had submitted yourselves in the Ask Me Anything campaign, so we've definitely incorporated those here. Before we do that, let's go ahead and look at what your screen and kind of get you oriented to what you're looking at here. So on the first thing is to go on the far right-hand side of your screen, and you'll see a green box that's there, a green hazy box, pun intended, but that is for the next webinar that's coming up in March. That's your ticket. You should see a RSVP right below that. You just press the button that gets you automatically registered, puts on the calendar. You don't have to enter any additional information, but that one, the name of that is Up in Smoke, Navigating the Haze of Marijuana Policies in 2025. We know that those are constantly changing, always evolving, especially from the state level. And so we want to make for sure that you guys are in compliance and help you with any of your policies. We also have an employment lawyer that's going to be with us. He's extremely knowledgeable, and so you'll love hearing from him as well. All right, so now let's go ahead and let's move to the bottom of your screen, and that's where things get really good. That is where I always say that the gifts come from, so that's kind of the honeypot there at the bottom. But what you'll notice is that there should be a box that's a Q&A box, and you'll see it should say on there, enter a question. That's the one place that you want to make for sure that you know how to go to today. So you're going to use that for communicating with us. Give us your questions. If you have any stories, if you have any tips that you want to share with the group, anything like that, you're going to utilize that area. And then in addition to that, that's also going to be the spot when we do the Is It Recordable game. And so that will be where you'll enter your guesses on whether something is recordable or not. All right, and then lastly, this will be recorded. I saw that there were some that had already asked for it. It definitely will be recorded. We'll send out the on-demand link usually about 24 hours after we wrap up here. But we do have a copy of the slide deck that's located there at the bottom of your screen so that you can download those and look at them. We also have some additional resources there. I think Kane put some blogs there to help you with some of your record keeping questions as well. All right. Well, now that we have all that clear, let's go ahead and meet our panel. Dr. Sherry, I'll start with you, and Dara, I'll come to you next, and then followed by Matt. Dr. Sherry?
Thank you, Holly, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Scott Sherry. I'm Axiom Medical's Chief Medical Officer. My professional background is I'm board certified in preventive medicine, public health, and occupational environmental medicine. And I've been supporting the U.S. military, government, and industrial operations for the past 15 to 20 years. And it's a pleasure to be with you today.
Fantastic. We appreciate you, Dr. Sherry. All right, Dara Wheeler.
Hi, Holly. Hey, everybody. Hey. My name is Dara Wheeler. I'm Axiom's Chief Marketing Officer. I'm over marketing and product. I've been with Axiom, this is my 18th year, and really enjoying supporting our clients and various programs that they've got and bringing good content like this to all of you. And we'll kick it over to Matt.
Matt.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Holly and team, thank you for having me on the panel. My name is Matt Bearden. I am the Regional Safety Manager for Sun State Equipment Company. I am in what we call the Gulf Super Region, which encompasses Texas and Oklahoma. So under my umbrella, I guess you could say loosely, of jurisdiction from a safety standpoint, I have 19 branches, soon to be 20, and then soon to be 21 branches where I am responsible for essentially educating our employees and helping keep them safe and rolling out programs and all the things that we like to do at Sun State to keep our employees safe. We're a very people-centric company, and so our big focus is not only on just safety and risk, but also on the people side of safety and risk as well.
Fantastic, Matt. Well, it sounds like that you definitely have your hands full with that many branches there, but we're thrilled that you were able to join us today, and I appreciate all of you joining. To give you an idea of what we're going to kind of go through today, we're going to start out talking about some of those key concepts. We'll talk about some of the recent updates. Then we're going to switch over to the fun part, which is the Is It Recordable game. We played this last year. You guys loved it, and so we brought it back another version again this year. Then we'll go into some of the common pitfalls, and then obviously round it out with some of the best practices that are there. So I'm going to go to Dr. Cherry first. Dr. Cherry, talk us through some of the key concepts then that we need to keep in mind for OSHA record keeping this year.
Certainly, and I think the first big distinction is these words are very similar, but a little bit different when it comes to execution and just the way you think about categorizing and recording or reporting your injuries. And so an OSHA reportable, I like to think of as kind of the first and most important thing to be aware of. And so that's with regards to severe workplace injuries or illnesses, and they really need to be immediately reported to OSHA. So a fatality, very severe, very hopefully rare event, that needs to be reported within 8 hours of learning about that. And then you have kind of tiered down below that hospitalization within 24 hours. This here I think of as OSHA reportable as life, limb, or eyesight. And so an amputation or loss of an eye, those last three need to be reported to OSHA, 24 hours with a phone call. And so, obviously today we're going to be talking about OSHA recordability. And so again, this also needs to be a communication to OSHA. And but this is really more of a passive compared to reportable injuries. And we'll talk more about kind of all the key criteria of what's recordable as well.
Okay. Anything that you wanted to talk about in regards to the work relatedness, anything along those lines?
Certainly. So, when an employer is obviously conducting their business operations, there's going to be incidents involved. And so when we think about OSHA recordability criteria, the first thing that I think about is it work related, right? So someone can have a medical condition or incident happening on the premises or during work time or work environments. And so work relatedness is absolutely the first piece that I think is kind of the hinge pin for which we keep going down this hierarchy of analysis. And, this, if the environment is either contributing or causing the illness or injury, then that is what we would call work related. And there's more nuance behind that. You can have just a totally new diagnosis or condition, or you can actually have an aggravation of a pre-existing condition. And so, I think that that nuance may affect a workers' compensation claim, but still, with regard to OSHA recordability, contribution or aggravation of a pre-existing condition is still a recordable criteria that we look at. Excellent.
I think that was actually what you just covered. That was one of the questions that somebody had submitted, was asking, is there any way that there could be a recordable or for workman's comp that maybe you would have a claim, but also it wasn't necessarily recordable. So fantastic. I appreciate you covering that. All right, let's go to Matt. Matt, talk us through then some of the updates then that we may need to be aware of when we're preparing our records this year.
As far as when we're talking about electronic submission requirements, is that what we're going, where we're going?
Yeah, let's go there.
Okay. So OSHA has some new electronic submission requirements. Of course, we live in a cyber world these days and have been for a while. So many of those have to do with, so when we talk about you have 100 employees or more, that type of thing. So OSHA, their website, I'll go back and say that their website used to be very user unfriendly, and it's become much, much better. So when it comes to submitting your forms, the very best place to go, and I'm just going to get very, very, I guess, basic and simple with this, is that when you need to establish and submit a form, your best place to go is going to be to OSHA's website. And it's been my finding that simply www.osha.gov, you go to their website and it can navigate you through multiple areas of the things that you need to submit. As far as injury tracking application, ITA, again, it's on the website. You can follow along with that. It will walk you through exactly what you need to do. And same thing on your record keeping and your compliance, as far as your OSHA 300, 300A, et cetera. It's an excellent resource, especially if you have a little bit smaller business, you're not a large company, large corporation. It really helps by following along with that. We can get down into the tall weeds on this and the different things that you need to do. But if I'm doing anything like that, I am seriously going to the website, following along with what I need to do. And if I get into a worst case scenario situation where I need to have a conversation with someone, I'm simply going to call their 800 number. It takes you through prompts. If you need to speak with someone about what you need to file, it'll walk you through that. That way you can submit the correct form. When in doubt, always reach out. That's always been my motto, because if you don't know, absolutely go to the source, and what I consider the expert source, which is going to be OSHA and their website or their 800 number.
Awesome. Matt, I love that what you said about reaching out, that if you don't know, make for sure that you are reaching out. That's a great phrase that we need to maybe put in our little pocket too. I like that. Well, let's go to is it recordable? And so just to kind of give you guys an idea of what it is and what it is that you would do, we're going to give you a scenario. We'll have Dara read the scenario to you, and then we want you to respond whether you think that it is recordable or whether it's not recordable. And then the first one that answers that correctly, then we will make for sure that you get a prize for that. So we're going to be watching this chat very, very closely to see who our first answer is, but definitely we encourage everybody to participate. And if you have a specific question about one of them or a story you want to share, you're more than welcome to share that as well. All right, are we all ready? All right, Dara, have at it.
Okay, I'm going to speak slowly so you guys can start jumping in with guesses. Read it faster than I can. A 35-year-old project engineer attended a mandatory client dinner outside of normal working hours. During the dinner, the employee ate shellfish and experienced severe food poisoning. After vomiting all night, the employee was admitted to the hospital for dehydration and given IV fluids. All symptoms resolved and the employee returned to work. Is this recordable or not? I'll pause for a second. We've got some answers coming through.
Got a lot of good ones that are coming in.
Okay, Dr. Cherry, Matt, is it recordable?
Yes.
It'd be interesting to see what the wisdom of the crowd says, right? It's there's, I think, statistics about that. As I think through this scenario, it can be a little tricky, right? This is a personal choice of what the person picked to eat, things like that. But in general, the way I look at this scenario is that, yes, it is recordable because this happened during a work-related event. And so really the work environment did create the hazard. And that's how I think through it. And Matt, it sounds like you are also providing some input there as well.
Absolutely. The key word here for me is mandatory, followed by client dinner. It was a mandatory client dinner, which means it is job related. So absolutely. But to your point, Scott, it is definitely a tricky one for sure.
Hey, there's a good one that just came in. And I'll ask both of you this question as a follow-up to that. And so they said there was a question, if that person was admitted, which we say that they were, would it be a severe injury reporting? Would you need to contact OSHA?
I would say yes. If it's a hospitalization, then you could actually say it's not only an OSHA recordable, but it's also an OSHA reportable.
Yeah.
Matt, I'm happy to hear one thing I've seen in my career over the years is it's a team approach with regard to this, and you're going to have safety, legal, risk, medical, industrial hygiene inputting into this as well. But, I think we all have our lanes, but we all contribute to kind of the stream of this flow.
All right.
We've had some really good points, I think, in addition to that. So a lot of people were asking which part of the scenario makes it recordable. Dr. Cherry, can you talk a little bit about what part of that makes it recordable?
Certainly. Again, we're going to look at is it work related? First off, I think that's the most important component. When I've looked at more trickier cases, you can have you essentially need work relatedness, and you need like a significant diagnosis. And then there's nuance about medical treatment beyond first aid, or if it affects the duty status with days away, days away from work, or limited work or transfer, things like that. In this case, I do believe the strongest component is work relatedness. And then it also qualifies as a significant diagnosis versus a minor diagnosis. And I think that is less well defined in the OSHA guidance, but as a medical provider, you can definitely have that lead way. But I would suffice to say that this amount of, this scenario where the person has true food poisoning is definitely a significant medical event. And
it's the treatment of IV fluids that takes it beyond first aid treatment.
Yes. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out, Dara. Yeah.
So it's a lot of people have pointed out that it's that mandatory piece that I think Matt said as well, where it's if this had been voluntary, if the scenario was a little different, this might not have been raised to the level of a recordable. But because this was mandatory, which led it into that work relatedness, and then the medical treatment beyond first aid by giving them the IV fluids for the diagnosis of food poisoning is the part that kind of trips it into that medical treatment part.
Yeah.
Right. And so maybe it's worth just spending a moment about this is a very dichotomous component, right? Medical treatment beyond first aid. And so fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your perspective, OSHA actually defines what is first aid. So anything that's not on their first aid list is considered medical treatment beyond first aid. So I'll just review that briefly. So I think one of the biggest ones is non-prescription medication is considered first aid. And I think a lot of our audience has experienced kind of a nuanced version of this where one of their injured employees is given an over-the-counter medication, but perhaps at prescription strength. And so if a medical provider provides an over-the-counter medication, but at prescription strength, then that's considered medical treatment. Most immunizations or vaccines are considered medical treatment beyond first aid, but tetanus immunization, and that's the only one, is considered still first aid. Then you have cleaning of wounds, bandaging, and wound covering. And so one of the nuances here is if it's a laceration, using steri strips versus sutures or staples. And so steri strips are still considered first aid, but sutures or staples are not. You have hot and cold therapy. Another sticky point is rigid supports or non-rigid supports. So like a sprained ankle, if it's using an elastic bandage, then that's considered first aid. But if there's a rigid splint, then that is considered medical treatment. And there's a few others, but I think those are the main things. for this specific case, thanks again, Dara, for pointing out the IV. I think I was reading a little too fast myself because I wanted to beat the crowd and maybe even Matt. But, for heat stress, you're allowed to do oral or just drinking fluid rehydration. But obviously an IV is definitely a significant medical intervention.
All right. We've got several more to go. And just for those of you who are following at home, I have Shonda Bradford was the one that was first for that one. So good job, Shonda. All right. Are you guys ready for the second one?
I don't know. We've had a lot of comments already for the first.
I'm telling you, I don't know if we're going to get to the end of them. Yeah.
A lot of you have jumped in with additional questions too. We will make sure to follow up with people, and if you had additional clarification or questions needed, we'll make sure you get some answers. Yeah. Okay. Scenario 2. Right. A 47-year-old male employee scratched his middle index finger on a vinyl saw clamp at work. He immediately began walking to the on-site first aid station to obtain a Band-Aid. On the way, the injured employee met a coworker who told him that he had a Band-Aid in his pocket. As the coworker began to apply the Band-Aid, the injured employee looked at his finger where there was a small amount of blood and on the skin adjacent to the nail bed. The worker immediately became lightheaded and fainted. The injured worker did not incur any additional injury or treatment. When he regained consciousness, the employee indicated that he fainted because he cannot tolerate seeing blood. Is this recordable?
Ooh. Lots of answers coming in.
That's a good one.
Mm-hmm. It's tricky. All right. Dr. Cherry and Matt, what do you think here? Are we recordable or are we not recordable?
What do you think, Matt?
Yes.
Yeah.
As you read through these, you can, I was quickly, when I see a saw, I'm thinking about like at least a massive laceration, but maybe even an amputation. And so, but, you're trying to predict the ending here. But I think what's really the hinge on this one is fainting is considered loss of consciousness. So that's specifically identified in OSHA recordable requirement. Then I actually think about our first question about, is it OSHA reportable? So a lot of loss of consciousness, folks that have loss of consciousness may be hospitalized. So if this person was actually then followed up to be hospitalized, then it would be OSHA reportable as well. But potentially that's not necessarily the case with this clinical scenario where there's probably a good reason for just kind of this psychogenic passing out from seeing your own blood.
Yeah. So the loss of consciousness then is what makes this recordable, correct?
Yep.
All right.
Yes.
Are you guys ready? Ready to go to number 3? We've got 10 in total, so there's still more chances. All right, here we go. Dara?
Okay, we've got workplace fight. 2 employees are arguing on the production floor over a personal issue unrelated to work. The argument escalates and one employee punches the other, breaking their nose. Both employees are suspended following the incident. Is this recordable or not?
Yes. And if I could add to that, yes, when someone has a scenario in front of them, and let's say we're reading this or you know of this because it's your workplace, listen for clues, look for clues in the wording of whether it's verbally or on paper. What are the things it says when you see breaking their nose and you're at work? Regardless if you broke your nose walking through a door and it closed on you or another employee punched you, you are still at work. So it really helps to look for those word clues as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just to follow up on that, this is the first time it's ever happened, but actually Jerome Monaco was the first one that got not just this question correctly, but he was the one that answered the prior question correctly. So Jerome, great job. You're 2 for 2 there. All right, let's move on to number 4. Dara.
Okay, lunch break hand laceration. A 26-year-old male employee cut his hand while sharpening a personal pocket knife. He was sitting in a company-owned vehicle while parked in the employer's parking lot, but he was on lunch break. As the incident occurred, while on his lunch break, the employee drove himself to the local urgent care where he received 3 stitches. Is this recordable or not? We'll pause for a second there. We've got lots of people jumping in.
I love seeing the hands up and the hands down.
I do too. Yeah.
I'm trying not to be influenced by it.
I know you get hard.
What was that TV show where, was it Circle of Game of Thrones, where, the king is, sentencing someone to death or not based on his thumb up or down. So when I see thumbs down, I'm worried.
Yeah.
All right. Let's have an answer. What do you think? Dr. Sherry, I'll come to you for this one. What do you think? Is this recordable?
Yes. I really like to think through these because in general, just my own prejudice obviously comes through at times, like if it was my own company and if I could have my own OSHA. And so, I feel like an employee, sharpening their own pocket knife is kind of on their own. But when you look at the rules, this actually is considered OSHA recordable. And so I think what's really important here from this type of scenario is having maybe personnel policies that really educate and train folks and hold them accountable of not doing kind of dangerous work on company time or in company environments, Yeah.
Matt, do you want to talk to us about why this one specifically is recordable? Because I think there's some that are questioning since it had occurred actually while the employee was on break and that he had taken himself to the hospital.
Yeah, see, this is a real touchy one because at face value, you go, yeah, he was sharpening his own knife. Now he was in a company-owned vehicle. He was on company property. So again, there's a good word clue, but the one that really drives the point home to me is he received 3 stitches. So he was in a company vehicle on company property, and he received 3 stitches, which is above what we can do in our medical kit over in the shop. So yes, now that's a hard call right there. And for me, that's where I'm not going to be the only one thinking through this. I'm going to be pulling in a few people to have this conversation because, boy, this one could be real sticky. He sharpening his own knife and in a company truck on company property. I will tell you though, many years ago, I've been an employee with Sun State now for almost 17 years. We actually had an employee cut his finger while doing something at his desk, and it was like, ooh, that's bad. And because everybody thought, oh, Matt's a safety guy, he knows what to do, even though I wasn't in safety for the company at the time, we got together, I administered first aid. Had I had to take him to the emergency room, though, because it was deep, because it wasn't, thank goodness, a Band-Aid and Neosporin worked, then it wasn't recordable. But those stitches, that's what tells me right there it's recordable. Company truck, company property, yes, it is.
Absolutely. The other piece too that I think that sometimes may get kind of buried in this is the topic about the lunch break. OSHA actually says that because they're on lunch break, that still makes this applicable in terms of if an injury occurs. So there's a lot of good clues in there, not just the time, but also the location and what had occurred and also those stitches. So great job, everybody. All right.
But I do want to just hit again what Matt said real quick.
Yeah.
These are group decisions. And I know a lot of you have come in and said, we've had scenarios like that. We determined it was not recordable. And that's within your rights as a company to decide kind of how to manage that, manage the risk, manage that approach. And that is why I think Scott and Matt have said this, where that team approach to decision making is important because these scenarios are very nuanced and can be really compartable. Now, the other thing, I know we've had a lot of questions about the difference between claims and recordable or recordable. And I know Scott mentioned that, but just to hit on that again, there is a total bifurcation between workers' compensation and OSHA. And so just because something is one, it doesn't mean it's automatically the other. Now, of course, work relatedness in terms of treatment of an injury, there is that work-relatedness threshold for both, where you're determining whether there is this work-relatedness in the management of a case. But sometimes things are, or a lot of times things are not recordable, but they are compensable. And so there is a different threshold between the two. So just because, and vice versa, somebody asked if a denied claim was reportable. So you can also have the reverse, where something gets denied under workers' compensation, but that doesn't mean it didn't meet the threshold for an OSHA recordable.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a great point, Darren. That was something that was so counterintuitive to me when I first got into this field. I just assumed they were perfectly aligned, the systems of workers' compensation and OSHA recordability, because I kind of work in a place where I see both a lot. But you can have a claim that violates kind of a simple administrative rule that makes it non-compensable. It won't even be accepted as a claim, but still it could be potentially OSHA recordable and vice versa. So I see them as kind of related, but can be totally different. And sometimes, you can't use one to defend the other, I think is the most, is what our audience really needs to take from this. And then Holly, I think recently you helped remind me too, I used to read a lot of the letters of interpretation from OSHA in past work, but when we were working a case together recently, you had found a really good letter of interpretation. So, obviously OSHA guidance can't cover every little nuance. So people will actually submit questions to OSHA, and if it's a good question, they'll actually publish the letter of interpretation. So it's kind of like a body of law. It's like case law being further created. And so potentially even looking at a letter of interpretation, because if you have a scenario that you're leaning towards one way, and if OSHA has a letter of interpretation on it, it's really good to know about that.
Absolutely. Melinda Anderson is our winner for that one. So great job, Melinda. Okay, number 5, are we ready?
We're ready. Do we need a stretch break? Come on, everybody, make sure
you're...
you're...
stretch, yeah.
Okay, let's get going.
All right, number 5.
Okay, witnessing a traumatic workplace incident. A 30-year-old warehouse worker witnessed a traumatic incident at work in which the coworker was seriously injured by machinery. Following the incident, the employee began experiencing symptoms such as nightmares, anxiety, and difficulty concentrating. The employee sought treatment from a mental health professional, was diagnosed with PTSD, and advised to avoid the warehouse for 2 weeks to minimize exposure to potentially triggering environments. Is this a recordable?
Darren, we had also a question that was submitted about this, and Tristan was asking about some of the OSHA guidelines for addressing some of the work-related stress, burnout, anxiety, et cetera. And there's also, there's always been some talk about, where does mental health fit in, and where does that, just because if someone claims that they have symptoms that would be associated with a mental health disorder, does that mean that it's necessarily recordable? So I really love this question because it definitely gives us the answer on what that would be. All right, let's see. I tell you what, let's go to Matt. Matt, what do you think?
Yes. And again, I look at these word clues in the scenario. So the employee was at work when he witnessed the traumatic incident. So it is a workplace incident. And then he sought treatment from a mental health professional. So if we want to go to the psychological side of, would this be first aid? He didn't have a traumatic experience or he witnessed a traumatic experience where he went to a coworker and said, man, I just need to talk this through. And they talked it through and he said, yeah, I feel better about it now. He went to a mental health professional and was formally diagnosed with PTSD. So, and was advised to avoid the warehouse for 2 weeks to minimize triggering. A lot of clues in there that say, yes, this is definitely a recordable.
Yeah. One of the things that stuck out to me whenever I was reading through some of the letters of interpretation was that they really focused on that in scenarios like this, that if you have a formal diagnosis by a physician that would be related to this, and that is when it becomes, recordable versus not. Yeah. Anything else any of you want to add on that one?
I just think for me, I run this kind of structured scenario where looking at work relatedness and then level of medical treatment, so is it first aid or not? And then is there a change in duty status, days away from work, or, a change. So I kind of run that scenario kind of in that order, because if you can see if something's not work related, then that helps. The rest of it can be very complicated, but if the work environment didn't initially cause it, then, so I always think of work relatedness as the birth certificate down this process.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We had a really good question that had came in for this one, and they were asking specifically. So if you had the scenario and that person had actually just talked to a counselor that was on site, and so they weren't taken off work, would it then be recordable? If you
So I
did
think
not
Matt
have a
had some
formal,
really good,
yeah,
yeah,
if you
I
did
think
not
Matt
have a
had some
formal
really good,
diagnosis.
right. I think Matt had some really good dialogue there, where if there wasn't a formal diagnosis by a licensed healthcare provider, and if there was no duty status change, then that helps support it, keeping it as, at either first aid or, just not OSHA recordable due to a change in duty status.
All right. And let's see, Melissa Prock is the one that got that one right. So Melissa will definitely be reaching out to you as well. Okay, let's move on to number 6, Dara.
Okay, number 6, a suspected heat-related illness. A 34-year-old female employee was delivering customer packages on a routine route. The temperature that day was 81. Upon developing a headache, muscle aches, and nausea, she notified her supervisor, who assumed she was suffering from a heat-related illness and advised her to seek medical attention. When evaluated, the employee had a blood sugar of 330 and was treated with IV fluids and insulin. The employee was later disclosed that she was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes several years prior, but had not been under the care of a physician. Recordable or not?
Ooh. My first thought is no, but I have a feeling Dr. Cherry could really speak to this one a little bit better. Again, that's one of those where I'm going to pull everybody, including the referee, in on this opinion.
And I think, Matt, when you look at this case, we're seeing, behind the curtains here, we have all the information. And I think me as a medical provider, I get to see a lot of you see the whole case, but many times a supervisor, HR, or safety, they may only see the top half of this scenario, right? They may not actually have the medical information. So it can look very much like it to be a recordable case. So my opinion, again, I think this is very straightforward with regard to work relatedness. And I would say this is not work related. This really is a personal medical condition that manifested in the work environment. And so, for instance, heart attack, someone can have loss of consciousness. It can be from a heart attack. So it may even be reportable initially, and then maybe even recordable. You're thinking about it, but then once you get information that, this was actually not there was nothing in the work environment that caused the heart attack. This was purely a personal medical condition creating the heart attack. There are a couple of job categories where heart disease is actually presupposed, like for instance, for firefighters, but that's a very rare, that's a very specific population. But again, I just like to hammer home that a lot of our audience may not have the medical information to make that. So having that medical aspect of case management is absolutely critical to see the whole picture there.
Absolutely.
Dr. Cherry, can you talk about that a little bit more? So how would a safety person work through something like this without that information of pre-existing condition?
Right. So, I think when you have a case or a potential case, you can, and maybe I'll defer to Matt here, you can almost kind of pencil in recording it. But I think there's a lot of value in, really reconciling and being accurate about recording injuries. OSHA is not OSHA doesn't want you to record any frivolous injury. They want to record significant injuries, and especially if it's personal in nature. So I think a lot of times everyone on the team that's not medical only sees kind of the the uh, the person passing out or having issues, but you could actually refer this case for a medical opinion just to determine either work relatedness, medical plausibility, and then also if the treatment is appropriate for the so I think a lot of times non-medical personnel's handling this, they should just kind of request help through some kind of medical consultation or case management, and that way you can get insight into what you're usually not allowed to see under HIPAA. A lot of times, medical facilities will not give medical information to non-medical personnel.
Mm-hmm. Tom had a good point that you could involve your workers' comp. They could pull some of the records there as well. So that's a great addition there. Okay, and I have Tammy Kelly down for that one. So great job, Tammy. All right, number 7.
Okay, this is a fun one, and thanks, Scott, for going through the medical pieces. I think the HIPAA piece is always an interesting nuance to all of this. Okay, a 52-year-old male's annual audiogram reveals a standard threshold shift. The employee claims they frequently listen to loud music at home and that the shift isn't work-related. Is this recordable? And we actually had somebody send in a similar scenario. So a lot of you have asked a very similar question about audiograms and threshold shifts. So, Okay, what do we think? Is this recordable?
You want to give it to me or Matt?
You might need to take this one.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think the hearing conservation program has the most gray area and the most dangerous pitfalls with regard to what we're discussing today. And the reason I bring that up is, again, we have this structure of work relatedness, level of medical treatment, and then change in duty status. So the hearing conservation program, which is an OSHA standard, actually gives a lot of guidance. So, people should only be put on a hearing conservation program if they're expected or proven through industrial hygiene measures to be at a certain noise exposure level. I've been involved with many cases after the fact where, the company is saying, oh, this person really isn't exposed. So having exposure data is absolutely critical, because that actually will prove work relatedness or not. What we see here is someone is down this pathway, actually has a hearing loss, and if they're confirmed to have a standard threshold shift, really the rule is it is OSHA recordable unless a medical provider determines it is not work related. So this is a special situation. The hearing conservation program is kind of has an asterisk where an actual medical provider can do a follow-up analysis and determine work relatedness or not, kind of based on looking at the probability of personal exposures versus work environment. But this is very gray, and in general, my view on this is, if they are exposed in the workplace, then unless absent a significant personal medical condition that can really explain the significant loss, then it would be work related.
Okay.
And then recordable. Yeah.
Would it be possible for me to chime in for just a moment?
Sure.
Yes, please.
Okay. On that, so when we talk about hearing loss, threshold shift limits, dB level limits, that is a recordable. However, the thing of it is we have to be very aware of, and we've got a lot of people on here that are on here because they're safety minded. And I will tell you, as a boots on the ground from a safety manager's standpoint, one of the most neglected areas that we discuss, have safety stand downs, have safety huddles about, is loss of hearing. Now, if we're in an environment where it's a lot of heavy machinery, big machines going on, That's a little bit more prevalent, but in, say, my world where we have construction equipment and that type of thing, it's not a topic that gets spoken of a lot. And I tell people simply, oftentimes, unless you're exposed to a cataclysmic event where there's an explosion, something going off next to your head, your hearing goes away in little chips over the years. And suddenly you realize that you're asking everybody, what, huh? What are you talking about? So if I can say anything from a safety professional standpoint to anyone listening, make this a real topic of conversation with your employees, because I can go through shops sometimes and hear banging and banging and banging and never see one person with hearing protection in. And it's a huge, huge topic.
Excellent points.
I would just like to add a couple of things as well. There is actually a lot of value in getting a medical consultation in these types of components, because you can look at the type or nature of the hearing loss. And just as Matt said, noise-induced hearing loss looks different than age-related hearing loss. Then you can look at unilateral, you can look at the personal exposures. Sometimes we see a lot of firearm use, and my background in the military, you actually see contributions of one-sided hearing loss in the non-dominant ear, things like that. So, this is definitely something that you want to have a good documented policy and procedure, and really just go through those steps, because although this one is work related, there is still tremendous value in having a team approach for these types of scenarios.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to number 8, and I have Jack Leavitt. That's who I have down for winning this one. So we'll definitely get in touch with you, Jack. All right, Dara, number 8.
Okay, we got a few more, guys. Stick with us. A 27-year-old forklift operator performing routine work activities within a manufacturing setting was struck by an object that chipped a front tooth. The employee was evaluated at an occupational medical facility. He was not given any prescriptions and released to full duty. The evaluating physician recommended follow-up with a dental provider, but the employee declined. Is this recordable or not? You're all too savvy for us, I think.
They've done well with this one, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And what was it on that, Matt, that made that recordable?
Now here's the thing. It was a chipped tooth. Is it going to require something beyond basic first aid? Absolutely, because last time I checked in my Centos first aid kit out in the shop, I don't have anything that'll repair a chipped tooth. I may have something that gives them a little pain relief from a chipped tooth, but I can't just get them in the chair and fix it. So it does. And that's a little bit of a sketchy one in a lot of ways, but yeah. Chipped tooth, again, word clue right there that said, yep, it's recordable. Now it's cosmetic. So sometimes people will argue, well, it's cosmetic, so therefore it's not recordable. But again, and you can get in the weeds on this a lot, but it was something beyond first aid. So yes.
Agreed.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's some humor behind, I forget the analogy to it, but if it's someone else's chipped tooth, it's not a big deal. But if it's your chipped tooth, it's a big deal. I actually believe that chipped tooth is actually listed somewhere as considered a significant event, because you can actually get anchored, right? Like if you're seeing really significant injuries, you're doing very physically demanding work, very safety sensitive work, and you're used to seeing major injuries. A chipped tooth does seem minor, but again, it's good to have it's good to have a balanced approach to this. So that's why you almost have to say, if this happened to me, would this be considered significant or not?
Mm-hmm.
Agree. All right, let's go to number 9, and I have Jake Kimmery, I believe is for that one.
Okay, a 54-year-old female suffered a work-related laceration, treated with first aid measures, and physically capable of performing all routine job functions. However, the employee was prevented from performing normal job duties in close proximity to the biological production area of the facility as a precaution against potential biocontamination of the output of its processes. Is this recordable or not?
This is a tricky one.
Hmm.
Matt, I know that you had a 150, so if you need to drop at any point, please feel free to do so.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm going to hang with this one for a minute. I want to see the.
Okay. Okay.
But thank you.
You bet.
I'm thinking through this one too. I'm initially thinking no, but it's just one of those where it could get a little weird.
Yeah, the way I think through it
There's the
again,
answer.
yeah, it looks like, it's going to be work related. It looks like it's going to not cross the threshold of beyond first aid. So then you just worry about duty status. And so it looks like there's a change in duty status here. But what's interesting is the duty status change is actually from a position of protecting the integrity of the product versus recovery from the injury itself. And so again, I feel good about saying this would not be work recordable.
Agreed.
I would agree completely with Dr. Cherry. Yeah, not because first aid measures were taken. The company or the facility made the decision to move her from something because of the biocontamination possibility. Yeah.
All right, good call. And I have Beth Veland, I believe it is. Beth, we've got you down. You were the first one that got that, so good job. All right, last one. Is everybody ready?
And
Okay,
can I
final
throw
one.
one thing in? May I throw in one thing before I jump off? And my apologies to everyone. I'll be on another call. Thank you for having me. This has been fantastic. I will tell anyone here who will listen to me that the folks, and this is not a paid advertisement, that the folks at Axiom have been absolutely fantastic for us at our company. It's beyond belief, and all of my leadership, all of my managers sing their praises whenever we have the need to use them. So Axiom, thank you guys for being as incredible as you are. And thank you for having me on this call.
Absolutely,
Thanks, Matt.
Matt. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, everyone. Bye now.
All right. Okay.
Final one. We can do it.
Ready? Okay.
Okay. 41-year-old male employee was returning from an out-of-town work trip on a Saturday morning and was not scheduled to work that day. Upon leaving the airport, he decided to stop at a nearby convenience store, though it required him to drive past the highway entrance that would have been his normal route. At the convenience store, the employee purchased gas, food for himself, and a flower for his wife. When leaving the store, he had a collision and sustained a right wrist fracture. Is this recordable or not?
Ooh. Mixed answers.
Those thumbs down still spook me.
We have a side chat
You
in
know,
marketing trying to decide if it was Game of Thrones, Spartacus, or Gladiator.
Oh, you're
We
right.
determined the point of interest. Yeah, the point of origin was Spartacus.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, Dr.
Yeah,
Cherry,
so
what do you think here?
So just going through kind of the, our structure here, work relatedness. So this one is already immediately tough, right? Because the person's not in the typical work environment. So they're out of town, but they're on a work trip. So you really have this indication of travel status, right? So work travel status, then kind of it has this huge blanket effect, right? Anything on travel status actually is considered work related for the most part. The nuance here, which can be frustrating, I think, in some ways, is the person kind of is going outside of what's needed, but really because this person is on work status, pretty much everything they do from the time they leave to the time they come back is considered work related. So once you've met the criteria for work relatedness, then we see easily this person has medical treatment beyond first aid, a significant diagnosis. And so again, this is easily considered recordable then. Absolutely.
There were some that had mentioned that he had stopped at his own at the store. And do you want to talk about why that's still allowed, even though he stopped at the store?
Yeah, the way I think of it as, again, once someone is traveling for work, pretty much everything that they're doing from the time that they leave to the time they come back is considered work related in the sense of they're performing work. And so you do want to maybe, this is, I think, there is an opportunity to learn from this example, like one of the other ones with the personal knife sharpening, where you really want people to do only what is absolutely critical to get the work done. And, it's a little bit challenging, again, if this person's traveling for multiple days, because they're obviously going to be going for lodging and meals and things like that. But, I think a lot of times when I've dealt with these difficult cases, the employee wants to do what's right for the employer. They don't want the employer to get dinged a lot of the time. So they're looking to say, hey, I won't, do a workers' comp claim. But we know, again, those are independent systems. And, the employer can be held, if audited, to a higher level per se. And I rotated through OSHA as a medical resident. And so at the Department of Labor, I learned, I forget how many hundreds or thousands of people work at OSHA, but there's about 5 physicians and the rest are essentially enforcers. And so it's like 5 docs and then, 500 to maybe 2,000 or more enforcers. So, it's almost like doing your taxes. You're kind of, you're given some leeway, but if you're audited, then some serious pain can come your way if there's a trend, right? And it may invoke a larger audit, so to speak. So anyway, hopefully that helps a little bit.
Absolutely. So what you're saying also is that if I was on a work-related trip, but then I went off on my own and I went to Disney World with my family and I had an accident, then it would not be work-related and it would not be recordable if that was the case, correct?
Correct. Yes.
All right. But if I was on my way back home. All right.
Yeah.
Derek, tell us about some of the common pitfalls real quick and we'll go through some best practices before we wrap up.
Yeah. Thank you all for all of the engagement. Again, I know it's been really fun to kind of go through these in this safe space. So some of these are common pitfalls, and we've talked through a lot of them. Accurate timing of reporting and making sure that distinguishing between recordable and non-recordable, work-relatedness, making sure that you're submitting timely with the different timing deadlines, the kind of in between of managing people's privacy and making sure that their private information is held appropriately versus, what's needed to manage an injury is really important. And as things progress through an injury, making sure you continuously update logs. And I know a lot of you have a lot of experience with this, but these are just some of the common pitfalls that making sure you have a team approach can help make sure you mitigate those risks.
Absolutely. And I forgot to mention, but Barbara Conger was the one that had gotten number 10 right. So good to Barbara. All right, Dr. Cherry, do you want to wrap us up then with talking about some of the best practices then?
Certainly. And, I think what I've seen in practice with organizations that I've helped is really having a process and policies and make sure that your process follows your policies and make sure your policies are up to date. Mm-hmm. And, that leads to really centralizing reporting systems and making sure that the company knows what's happening across all of its departments, divisions, things like that. Educating and training employees and supervisors about these pitfalls, right? Like we have a couple examples there where just some training would actually help prevent any risk where the company is going to get dinged when it's really not part of the actual duties of the one that got injured, like with the personal knife. And so also having the training address how supervisors and employees can report, because you obviously need to report all incidents, but there's also really a great recommendations to report near misses, because then you actually encompass more data that can actually show where maybe you have a risk that is not been fully recognized, and before you actually get incidents, or especially recordable or reportable incidents. And then still you want to maintain minimum disclosure of personal medical information and personal privacy, because that will actually help with everyone participating and feeling transparent in this process. And then, obviously technology continues to help us, but, there's a lot of moving parts here. So having technology assist with your process is absolutely critical.
Fantastic. Well, we are at 2:00, guys. I appreciate all of you for joining us and for being so attentive and asking so many questions. I think I was looking at it, over 500 questions that came in. So we'll definitely be following up with some of you guys here. But we appreciate you sharing all your information with us and communicating. So we look forward to, if you haven't already, make sure that you press that button for the marijuana webinar that we have going on this next month. And we look forward to seeing you there. Have a great day.